Here's a question about biblical errors. And what do we do about biblical errors? Well, like a lot of things, the answer to that depends on what you mean by the terms you're using. What exactly is an error? When someone is objecting to the Christian worldview or the Bible or something like that, they're going to find a lot of so-called errors that aren't legitimate contradictions. They're just differing elements of an account. Like, for example, one account might talk about two angels showing up, another one talk about one angel or two men or one man. It doesn't mean that that's an error. It just means that one gospel writer gave more details than the other gospel writer. So some errors aren't errors at all. What about things that appear to be errors when those kinds of issues are taken into consideration? Well, if the Bible is in fact inspired by God, then there are going to be no errors of the kind that matter. Sometimes a so-called error is when the Bible accurately reports a misconception of someone else. That's not an error. The Bible's just reporting what other people have believed wrongly. Sometimes there may be an error in the transcription of the New Testament documents, for example, and so you have one document that exists now about the Gospel or New Testament writing that says one thing, and one says the other. Now, they can't both be right, obviously. That is, they can't both accurately reflect the original. So a decision has to be made based on the evidence available to us on which one is most probably reflected the original. And this is where the science of textual criticism comes in. And it's a very refined science, and most of the significant differences in textual evidence, the variations that we have in between the manuscripts, can be resolved that way, and the ones that can't resolve don't really turn out to amount to much in terms of their significance theologically. So I guess the simple answer is, what do we do to the question of what do we do about biblical errors, is that we be clear on what we mean by an error, and then we try to address the specific challenge to the text. It turns out that most of the things that are claimed as errors aren't errors at all, but a misreading of the text. If Jesus says one thing, it's recorded one thing in one gospel, and then it's a little different somewhere else, if one thinks that the record was supposed to record exactly the precise words as if it were a Memorex quality, when in fact the disciples or the authors of the scripture were not intending to quote exactly, but rather to sum up, then it's not an error. So my experience has been that most of the so-called errors are really misreadings of the text themselves, and are not errors at all. And the errors that have to do not with the original, but the textual transmission over time, can be resolved through applying the rules of textual criticism.